Hi friends! Today we are building this gorgeous wall-mounted headboard with asymmetrical floating nightstands. This was a commission piece for one of our dear friends. Together we designed this modern headboard to be a functional yet beautiful wall feature. The headboard design creates a paneled wood look with the chamfered edges between panels to create shadow lines. The floating nightstands are asymmetrical for a high-quality look and use chamfered edges on the drawers for handles instead of hardware. Awesome things can happen when you get an architect, landscape architect, and an engineer in a room designing together. We begin our adventure at the lumber store. If you haven't tried buying lumber from a hardwood dealer, it is the easiest way to level up your project. Just take some time to understand the vocabulary and pricing structure before you go. For this build, we are buying 4 sheets of alder plywood and 2 boards we'll use for trim.
After getting the lumber back to the shop, we began laying out our cuts using our handy-dandy plan set. We always create a set of plans for any of our builds. This saves time, prevents mistakes, and it maximizes our material usage. You can find the plans for this build and more by following the links below to our website or our Etsy shop. Since we already know what size our panels need to be cut to and how we want to arrange them on the sheet, we can just get out our saw and start cutting. Since this project is for our friend, we're letting him do the honors of making the first cuts. Unfortunately, we don't have a track saw, but you can get similar results by using a regular circular saw with a straight edge. We made this straight edge using some plywood offcuts. We used a tight piece of string while gluing them together to make sure that they dried in a straight line. The saw we're using here is an old battery-powered saw that came with my drill 10 years ago. The saw has always drained batteries fast, and frankly that hasn't gotten better with age. It wasn't long before we just had to switch out to the corded jigsaw. Do yourself a favor and just buy corded saws. This was painful. But with the main panels cut out, we get our first glimpse of how this project is going to look.
Beautiful! The next 2 sheets of plywood will become the floating nightstands and drawer boxes. We started by cutting the sheet in half with the jigsaw to make it easier to manage. Then we brought it over to the table saw to clean up the jigsaw line and divide it into smaller strips. Managing larger pieces like this can be difficult by yourself, so it helps to have a feather board or a friend to help you by keeping the board pressed against the fence. Since many of the pieces need to be the same width, we nested those pieces together. For example, all the pieces that make up 3 sides of a nightstand will come from the same strip. This way they are all the same width and we can have a continuous grain pattern. We're leaving everything a little wide at this point. That way we can trim it to its final width when it is smaller and easier to manage accurately.
We now need to cut the strips to length, so it's time to break out our oversized crosscut sled. We made this massive sled specifically to cut out the large headboard panels, so it's a little heavy, but it works great. We used T-track clamps to hold the pieces in position and put painter's tape on the top surface to minimize tear out. We then clean up the factory edge of each strip before dividing it into each specific board that we'll need, starting with the drawer boxes and ending with the nightstand boxes. After cross-cutting each board, we now have manageable pieces. We start by grouping each set of boards into their common widths, 1 stack of nightstand boards and 1 stack of drawer box boards. We then set the table saw fence just once for each size and rip all of the boards in that group to the same width. Our saw was a little out of alignment, so the pieces wanted to drift away from the fence as they were exiting the cut. To help prevent this, our friend applied light perpendicular pressure to the boards to keep them pressed against the fence. Don't worry. He wasn't pressing hard enough down that kickback would pull his fingers into the blade. Besides, he isn't that attached to his fingers.
We repeated the same process to clean up the 4 edges of the large headboard panels, then brought them back to the crosscut sled to add a beveled edge to the top side. To ensure all the panels ended up the same length, we set up a stop block that the panels could each reference and then proceeded to cut a 45-degree edge on each one. We also wanted this same detail on the outer edges of the headboard, so we set the fence and ripped a bevel along the outer edge of the first and last panel. We'll be cutting triangular trim to glue to these beveled edges. thus hiding the plywood end grain by transitioning at the corner from plywood to board. Speaking of trim, we needed 2 different types. The first was for the drawer boxes. These will be a 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch strips glued directly to the edge of the plywood. The second is 3/4 inch triangular strips we mentioned earlier. These are for the headboard panels and the front face of the nightstand boxes. We started by cutting a 3/4 inch by 1 inch rectangle and then ripped it with the blade set to 45 degrees to make it into 2 triangles. The hardest part of this trim is cutting the compound angle for the outer edge of the headboard panels. That's why we include a printable angle in our plans to help you with your setup. If you ever feel like we're going too fast or you need more details, you can find all the information needed on our blog page for this build.
After cutting out the trim to the specific lengths we need for each panel, we gave them a quick sanding just to flatten out any saw marks. Once flattened, they were ready for gluing. The drawer box trim was easy to attach since it is just a flat surface attaching to a flat surface. The triangular trim took a little more prep, as the angle makes the trim want to slip away. We knocked together this quick jig to ensure we got a sharp corner, and then used some homemade bandy clamps to hold the trim on while the glue set up. Alright, we used a lot of bandy clamps. You can never have too many bandy clamps. These are actually pretty easy to make. We just attached some pieces of a bicycle tube to some regular spring clamps using some flexible glue. You can find more information on our website, or if you'd like us to post a video about how we made them, or really any other topic, let us know in the comments below. With the glue dry, it's time to trim the trim. We cut the length flush on each board by using a pole saw, then it's over to the router table. We left the trim wider than the plywood so we could come back with a flush trim bit and make it match perfectly. This worked really well on the small boards, but unfortunately the big boards were a little too tall and they would actually hit the ceiling if we tried to do them on the workbench, so we had to move to the floor. This worked reasonably well, but it would have been significantly easier if we'd had a palm router to do this with instead. But use what you got. As you can see, we did experience a fair bit of chip out on half the boards due to the grain orientation and the direction of our router bit's rotation. This cleaned up fairly well by the end of the process, but it all could have been avoided if we'd realized sooner that climb cutting these boards prevented this shredding. Just one of those rare occasions where climb cutting is actually better for your project. For those who don't know, climb cutting is when you cut the opposite direction that everyone tells you to.
With the trim now flush, it's back over to the table saw to add a chamfer to the edge of the trim. This chamfer gives the pieces a quality modern look. It's a subtle detail on the main headboard panels that you won't notice at first glance, but is quite distinct when you are closer to the piece. To achieve this detail, we set the table saw blade to 45 degrees, put the pieces on the crosscut sled, and set up a stop block. Then, cut the chamfer into the trim of each panel. Next, for the long edges of the outer panels, we carefully set the fence so the corners of the 2 chamfer cuts would align, and ran those boards through. To finish off these panels, we are going to add a small chamfer to the 2 long edges on the front face of each panel. This creates a shadow line between the panels. Not only does it help to blend any misalignments between the panels, but it also creates a beautiful accent feature. With the large headboard panels done, we moved on to the nightstand boards. Since we need all the chamfers on these boards to line up, we set up a fence once and then didn't touch it until we had run all the boards through.
The nightstand boards were now ready to have their mitered edges cut into them. This is a pretty critical step, so to ensure we get a tight edge, we took extra time to make sure the blade was set right. We started by using a digital angle block to set the blade just past 45 degrees to 44.9. This ensures that if there is a gap, it's on the inner edge and the outer edge will stay tight. Then we cut test pieces to check and make sure that they actually made a good box. To keep the continuous grain, we lined up the blade with the very edge of the board and used a stop block to ensure we removed the same amount of material for every other board. Just make sure you don't forget to lift that stop block before each cut. I may be speaking from experience here. Because these boards were combination core, And we have no dust collection system on this saw. We set up a box fan with an air filter in front of it to try and cut down on dust. It's not pretty, but it did help.
Flat panels are always easier to sand than boxes. So before we glued up the boxes, we went ahead and gave everything a quick sanding. This plywood was already pretty smooth and the veneer was thin, so it didn't take much. We just wanted to remove glue residue and even out the finish, so we jumped straight to the 180 grit and gave them a light pass. You have to be extra careful around the edges to keep the sander flat and not linger too long on one piece, or even the 180 grit will sand through. The trim needed a bit more attention. We hit the face of the chamfer with 80, 120, and 180 grit to remove any saw marks and blend the edges from panel to panel. Some of the alder veneer had these knot holes in it that had been filled with some kind of wood filler. Unfortunately, this wood filler was kind of chalky and you could break it down by rubbing it with your finger. It had to go. So we carefully chiseled out the filler and made the knot hole deeper to get a better bond. We then mixed some alder sawdust with the finish to tint it, followed by mixing that tinted dust with the wood glue to create a paste. We taped around the knot to limit the cleanup, then smeared the paste into the hole we'd made. Next, we had to sand this smooth, which was absolutely terrifying, because if you sand through the veneer here in the middle of the board, we'd have to scrap that whole piece. Thankfully, these knots cleaned up rather well.
Now, let's just say that you hypothetically, accidentally sanded through the veneer on the edge of the board and need to repair it. Well, luckily for you, I'm willing to purposefully make that mistake so that you can see how it's repaired. So, yeah, you're welcome. The first step is to remove the damaged portion of the veneer. If the boards already have a grain direction, you'll want to try and match that orientation with the replacement strip, so keep that in mind when cutting your replacement. In order to prevent glue squeeze out that needs further sanding, you'll want to thoroughly tape off all of the edges of this veneer replacement. And to really make sure that you guys know how to fix this issue, we went ahead and messed it up twice for you. We made sure to check that the replacement edge is straight before cutting out a section and gluing it to the boards. A dozen spring clamps and a few hours later, and you're ready to cut down the veneer. Without a block plane, we found that the best way to do this was with a utility knife, some sandpaper, and a lot of patience. But before too long, the repair is complete and you can breathe easy again. Was it a little frustrating? Yes, but that's part of woodworking. It's all about learning to hide your hypothetical mistakes.
After a quick dry fit, it was finally time to glue up the nightstand boxes. A great way to do this is to join the edges with tape so the box can be folded up. It's also a good idea here to tape all the edges to protect the project from any glue squeeze out. With the tape in place, we pre-clamped some clamping squares we had 3D printed to the boards. Then we spread the glue onto each of the seams faces and folded up the box. The tape and the clamps helped keep everything together and square while we set up some ratchet straps with 90-degree corner blocks. A piece of cardboard on top of the box helped protect the box from the metal of the ratchet while we cranked everything down tight. The ratchet straps really come in handy when making pieces longer than your longest clamps. Pro tip: don't forget to clean up any glue drips before they run off the tape. We always take a second to stand back and be proud of how far we've gotten in a project. We're halfway there.
While the nightstand boxes dried, we started on the drawer boxes. Since we know the final dimension of the nightstand boxes now, we could cut the drawer boxes to fit perfectly inside the nightstand boxes, minus the room needed for the drawer slides. Remember, it's better to be slightly under here than it is to be slightly over. To join the drawer boxes together, we cut Dados and Rabbets. First, we need to dial in the saw to perfectly half the thickness of the board. We did this by starting the blade at less than half thickness and then cutting both sides of an edge. Then we raise the blade and repeat until that little sliver is gone. We then brought in the fence and positioned it until we were only cutting a half thickness wide notch. We made a couple of adjustments and then kept checking our boards against each other until we had a perfect fit. But before too long, we ended up with a perfect rabbet joint. Now we just had to repeat this process to the edge of each of the drawer box boards. This process actually goes pretty fast once you have everything dialed in. Almost as fast as those boards that are trying to run away. This definitely isn't as fast as pocket holes or a butt joint, but it's details like this that make it a piece you can be proud of. With the blade and fence still set, we ran the boards along their long edge to make the first cut for the dado groove. We did each board at this position, and then shifted the fence out a blade width and made the next pass. Each pass slowly widened the slot as we got closer and closer to the board width. As we closed in on our desired width, we began to check our dado against a reference board, and then we give our fence the old tap 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 to move it just a hair and achieve that perfect fit. Look at this. Nice and snug. Beautiful. Finally, we trimmed down the drawer bottoms to fit the now adjusted drawer boxes. Just a few quick passes on the table saw and we were ready to start our glue up.
The best part about Rabbets and Dados is how easily they go together. If your cuts were square, then the joints hold themselves together square. All we had to do is spread the glue, piece it together, and then apply the clamps. The hardest part was just trying not to touch the wood with a glue-soaked finger. After quickly cutting a 45-degree angle on some strips that become the French cleats, we used the table saw to remove a bit of material. This gave us a flat surface to clamp on, as well as a place to drive a screw for some additional rigidity. We spread a bead of glue on the nightstand box, shimmied the French cleat into position, and then clamped it down with the flat spots we had made earlier. On the longer nightstand box, we decided it needed some additional clamping in the middle. So we threw together a quick clamping jig using some of the offcuts so we could put a clamp on the edge as well. It's not pretty, but it worked. After some final glue cleanup and sanding, these boards were ready to be prepped for finishing. We started with vacuuming the dust off every board and then wiped them all down with mineral spirits to clean them and prepare the surface for the finish. This was the first time we really got to see the grain on these boards since we hadn't wiped them down earlier for testing and we didn't water pop. Let me tell you, it's always satisfying to get to this point and see the results of your hard work coming together. And oh, darn, that's a glue spot. Yep, we'll need to sand that up. Oh well, better fix it now than to have it show up in the finish.
Speaking of finish, for this project we went with a Rubio Monocoat Oil Plus 2C. The specific colors we chose were Castle Brown for the headboard panels and nightstand boxes, and the natural color for the drawer boxes. This provided a beautiful contrast when you open the drawer boxes, and the Castle Brown on Alder provides just the right shade that our friend was looking for to match his space. We went through several different test combinations before choosing this one. Thankfully, Rubio sells smaller test bottles. We'll leave a link to all the products we used in the description below this video. After some quick math, we knew exactly how much Rubio we needed to mix up. If you're looking for these mix and application amounts, you can head over to our blog article on this build for all the quantities that you could need. The application is really straightforward. You measure out how much you need for your given surface area, trowel it around the piece, and buff it in. You can't buff too much out, but you can leave too much on. In this way, it's a lot like applying stain, and it's 1,000 times easier than polyurethane. Not to mention it looks so much better.
Time to watch the grain come to life. I'll be honest, we've been serial DIYers all our life, but mainly stuck to home renovation or decor items. Occasionally there has been a furniture piece over the years, but this project request from our friend meant we truly had to expand our skills, study, and practice. There are hours of unfilmed learning on how to get accurate cuts, construct good joinery, fit drawer boxes, and more. And actually, a lot of it was probably filmed, but didn't make it into the final cut. Also, we're not videographers or anything, obviously, so we had to teach ourselves how to film, edit footage, and record audio. It's truly amazing how much you can teach yourself if you're just open to trying, making mistakes, and moving forward. With those thoughts, I can say without a doubt, this is the nicest thing we've ever made. And I think just maybe we can call ourselves woodworkers now. To attach these panels to the wall, we are using a French cleat system. We made these cleats by ripping a 2x4 in half with the table saw blade cut at 45 degrees, and then chopped the pieces to length. Then gave them a quick sanding and a coat of stain to protect the wood. After measuring and marking the cleat position, we made sure they were square and then pre-drilled holes. Since the panels were already fully coated with Rubio, glue wouldn't have a very strong bond, so we attached these cleats with screws. The most important thing here was to make sure to set our drill bit to the correct depth and to choose the right length of screws. We wouldn't want to accidentally poke through the front of our panels.
The last thing to do on this build was to install the drawer boxes. This had always seemed like an intimidating step, but it's actually pretty easy once you know how. We started by cutting a scrap piece of wood to use as a spacer under each of the drawer slides, so that we know that they're at the same height. Then we used a second piece of scrap to make sure that the front of the slide is where we needed it to be when closed. A few tiny screws later, and we had our drawer slides installed. Next, we needed to install the drawer box. To keep the drawer from touching the bottom of the nightstand box, we placed some playing cards under the edges to act as temporary shims and lift the piece up. We then attached the frontmost screw of each drawer slide and pulled the box out slightly to drive in the second screw. And then we removed the box to install the third and final screw. Now, if you find that the drawer box isn't sliding correctly, then the gap may not be spaced quite right. On this box, we found that our gap was slightly larger than it needed to be. This was pretty easy to fix. We just cut up a few strips of cardboard, slipped them between the drawer slide and the box, and then tightened the screws back down. This spaced the slide off just enough that we got the perfect actuation of the slide. If you have a very small gap that you need to fix, then a few layers of masking tape will work well. If you have a much larger gap that you need to fill, then you'll need to cut yourself some solid wood shims. All that's left to do now is to install the drawer front. We once again reached for playing cards. We stuffed as many cards as we could between the drawer front and the nightstand box wall, and then split that stack in half and put half on each side of the drawer front. Next, we put the same number of cards below the drawer front so that we got a consistent gap all the way around the board. Then we pulled the board away from the drawer box slightly and used super glue and accelerator to temporarily attach it in place so that we can screw it in. It's amazing how often I use super glue on this build. With the drawer front temporarily secured, we opened it up and then used screws to permanently attach it in place.
And just like that, we have a perfectly functioning soft close drawer. I'd be lying if I said we didn't all close it about 20 times. Gosh, it's so satisfying. With all the pieces completed, we decided to do a test assembly at our house to make sure everything went together as we intended before we took it to our friend's house. We started by marking the height off the ground that the French cleats needed to be, and then pulled a string at this height to give it a nice straight reference line. A laser level would be nice, but hey, use what you got. We then brought over our French cleats and began attaching them to the wall. We know where the studs are located and tried to ensure we were only drilling the cleats directly into those for maximum strength. Since we were drilling so close to the edge of the cleat, we were careful to always pre-drill and countersink each hole, ensuring we didn't accidentally split the boards. We also made sure to align the edges of one cleat to the next so we got a smooth transition. Thankfully, our little helper was there to remind us.
With the cleats in place, we brought over the panels. We found that some of the panels had a little bow in them that caused the top edge to misalign. Thankfully, that's nothing our biscuit joiner can't correct later. Otherwise, the panels dropped straight onto the cleats perfectly. It's almost as if they were designed to do that. Weird. Before we could install the nightstand boxes, we needed to install the receiving cleats onto the panels. After pre-drilling a perfectly reasonable number of holes, we aligned the cleats with the measurements and then drove in a perfectly reasonable number of screws. We then repeated this on the other side while the whole family watched on in eager anticipation.
This is what it's like working from home some days, but I love it.
Moment of truth, let's see if this worked. Whew, perfect. After one of the most nerve-wracking drives of my life, we arrived at my friend's home and began assembly.
It's at this point that I'd like to say, if you enjoyed this video, if you found any of this content helpful, if it's inspired you to build something, or if you'd like to see more of our future builds, please consider subscribing to our channel. It will really help us grow and keep producing videos like this. We loved working on this project, and we'd love to do many, many more. And drop a comment down below to let us know what is your favorite design feature on this headboard. So, without further ado, the reveal. Thanks for watching. If you like this headboard build, then you're going to love seeing the bed frame that goes with it. Click on that video to check it out.